They are the governing entity of the community.
When you talk about fee system, you talk about the Board of Elections?
No. This is totally different. I'm just saying these patterns of things that I've learned.
You got to keep me on the same.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I jump around like that, but that's why I said, that's why I think that we're here, because we see all these patterns of systemic problems continuously. And I know that you're, lined in different categories, but when you keep seeing stuff, it makes your pattern, but at least it doesn't.
Okay. Hello? You want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you see me. I'm going to just stand up. I'm a little short. I'm Gloria Miranda. I'm with the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. And our office enforces the Federal Fair Housing Act. And, like the lady was saying here, it has a very broad name, the Fair Housing Act. Our office gets hundreds of inquiries every month, about practices that people think are unfair, that deal with their housing. Unfortunately, not every unfair act is jurisdictional for us under the Fair Housing Act. What the Fair Housing Act actually says is that in any housing-related transaction related to your primary dwelling, and here I'm talking about renting, buying, financing, insuring, appraising, anything that has to do with your primary housing. It's illegal under the law to discriminate against you based on your race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, or your status as a family with children. And that's all it is. Sometimes people will discriminate against you in other ways. They may say, I don't want a student living here. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, that's not a violation of the Act. So what we do in my part of the class, I'm in the intake branch, we get all these inquiries from all the southeastern U.S. and we are evaluating those to determine, is this person making a claim that's jurisdictional for us under the Act? There are 4 elements of jurisdiction. When we get a claim, one of the things we're looking at is it timely? Is what the person saying happened? Did it happen within 365 days? Because that's how long you have to file a claim under the Fair Housing Act. Is it timely? Does the person have standing? You can't file a complaint about something you heard about over here. It's got to be your house that you're talking about. There is such a thing as filing for somebody that you're their representative. Like you may have power of attorney for your relative. You can file a claim for them based on that. Is the issue you're talking about, is there a connection between what's called your protected class, like your race? Is there a connection between that and the bad thing that happened to you? We get a lot of complaints where somebody will say to us, I didn't get a loan modification that I applied for. So we ask them, well, what happened? And they tell you all the bad things the bank did. They lost my papers, they didn't answer my calls, they were rude. And they say, well, it's because of my disability. And you ask them, well, what did they say about your disability? Well, they didn't say anything about my disability, they just lost my papers, they didn't give me the modification. So that's the kind of claim where we would say there's no connection, there's no nexus between your class and what happened to you. So that's what we're looking at. We're also looking at whether we have jurisdiction over the respondent. Just about any respondent can be covered by the Fair Housing Act. There are very few exceptions. But those are the things we're looking at when we get a claim. There is no such thing as sort of a class action. A complaint, we look at these complaints one at a time. So when somebody files a complaint, they're filing it as to their own situation. And, that's part of what we're going to be doing here this afternoon and possibly tomorrow, is any of you who believe that, if you believe that in your housing is some situation that's going on, if you think you're being discriminated against because of your race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, or status as a family with children, then you can talk with us this afternoon and file your individual complaint. And we'll be looking at that. We don't accept every complaint that we get. As I said, we get hundreds of complaints every month. So we're going to look at that, determine whether we have jurisdiction over the complaint. And then if we do accept it, it's not like a lawsuit. You know, what it actually does is it spurs an investigation. If we accept your complaint, then your complaint will be investigated to see if there's a reasonable cause to believe the act is violated. And with that, I'm going to segue to my...
We're both in the Atlanta HUD office. I'm an investigator, equal opportunity specialist, and civil rights analyst. After the Gloria Department decides whether or not you have a complaint, it's given to me. We have a staff of about 19 investigators. We're there to determine whether or not the Fair Housing Act has been violated as it relates to the 7 bases that she mentioned. If so, we'll start an investigation of your claim. As well, since we're hearing all of these other issues going on, my department also do what we call multi-jurisdictional complaints that have to do with federal funds. Since the island is pretty funded and receives money from the government, we're looking to what are they doing with those dollars that we give to the state that come from our community planning and development department, how they being distributed, why aren't you getting the quality of life you all feel you deserve when it comes to waste management and all the other things. My department looks at that. Well, we are working with CPD, that's Community Planning and Development, who funds the state of Georgia, as well as McIntosh County, to see what funds have we given them and what funds have they used on the island to better your lives. But as she stated, your complaint has to make it through the door first. Once it does that, we'll start looking into those issues on the programmatic side, because what happens in a multi-jurisdictional complaint, you have your Title 8 portion that deals with the individual and the connection of whatever allegations they're making. If I find that there is no violation because you're African American, because you're disabled, as it relates to what you're complaining about, then I take it to the other side to look at the programmatic portion. Because you live on the island, because Georgia, the state of Georgia, funds the island, what are they not doing or should be doing? We call that affirmative furthering for housing, giving you the services that you need with the tax dollars that you pay for. And if we're not able to connect one of those things with you, we also have an opportunity to do what we call a secretary initiative complaint. It's kind of like a class action thing, but it's not. But that's where HUD becomes the complainant on your behalf. We file the complaint against the state or whoever it is, saying have these violations against Sapelo filing, start listing them. So this is different things that can happen, depends on what comes through the door when Gloria processes the complaint as to what we do. If we decide to take an individual complaint or do a secretary initiative, that would give me the authority then to start digging into the books of the state, McIntosh County, Department of Natural Resources, and everybody else who we name. Because what happens in any investigation, if you name one party, anybody who gets money from them, they're connected to the complaint. We don't just name one, we name everybody with the deep pockets to determine, okay, what role did you play, what role do you play? We call it trickle-down effect. So the state of Georgia gets the funds, they trickle them down to McIntosh County. Whatever cities in McIntosh County, it trickles down to them, so everybody gets named. So basically, it's a broad process, it takes a while, but we're kind of taking in everything everybody's saying, but we have a narrow window we can work in. But again, this afternoon, that everybody feels they want to come talk to us to find out a little more specific what your situation involved will be here today and tomorrow.
And again, they've offered to come tomorrow, so please be sure to speak to these ladies if you want a private one-on-one, where they may be able to come to your home, do an assessment here on the island, and give them more of a purview of our quality of life. But we were able to direct the communication to the other entities.
Yeah. And one more thing, if anything you allege in your complaint is not relevant and it's out of our jurisdiction, we will refer it to the appropriate agency. We don't just throw it out the window and forget about it. We refer it and we follow that referral until it's closed out.
Thank you for being here. As we communicated to the
the other agencies when they gave their opening statement. We have been considering what is the best way to address the issues of Sapelo Island and McIntosh County. Of course, the historic reference point coming out of the civil rights era was the remedies could be addressed by going to court or following a litigation-based approach. Within the last 10, 15 years, communities are no longer able to afford litigation-based approach. You cannot finance them. The foundations that were making those funds available are not doing anymore, nor the corporate community, and government staffing has decreased tremendously. So we have been considering more of a public policy reference such that when a public policy and administrative procedures or any other programmatic approach has been violated, then action can come forward. One of the better instruments to aid communities in doing that is the Fair Housing Act. So most of our communities can understand the reference points of individual to individual. What we've not been able to get a lot of clarity on is the Secretary Initiative and Programmatic. The research we've done has shown that over the last decade, more remedies have been provided to communities under the Secretary Initiative and the Programmatic approach. So we're welcoming the Secretary Initiative, but in particular the Programmatic approach, because we're absolutely clear that our community-based situation is benefiting more from that approach, and the reference point for collecting information and data that includes an oral communication and then being able to decipher this information and data would be something that we have been preparing the community to interact with.
When you talk about the secretarial approach, it's not that cut and dry. Like they first, it has to go out at the Title 8 stage, because that's what our office is for. The Fair Housing Act covers Title 8. The multi-jurisdictional programmatic stage is another element. And the Secretary Initiative complaint only kicks in and plays a part when we see that. After talking to everyone, and we're finding out, okay, none of your allegations reach the level of a violation as it relates to the 7 races. You can't make a connection that it's about race, color, or whatever. It's just some other things, bad management, mismanagement, all those things. That's when we start looking at the programmatic side to see if there's some pattern and practice issues going on, some systemic issues going on. Then we have to draw a conclusion to say, okay, we see that these things are happening. That takes us to the programmatic side to see, okay, what are the requirements for the state as it relates to Sapelo Island and providing them with services and funding. Once we determine whether or not they're violating that affirmative fair housing requirement, that's when we take it to our regional director, who has to forward it on to headquarters for them to say, okay, we're going to charge this as a Secretary Initiative complaint, and we'll be the recipient on behalf of Sapelo to push this forward. So, like I said, it's not a clear process. It takes a while, but like I said, we're kind of listening and analyzing what's being said, and then we first have to ourselves find out, because we're only getting you all the complaining side of what's happening. And until we get a valid complaint in the door to give us that authority and jurisdiction to reach over to the respondents, those are the people you're complaining about, to give them an opportunity to first provide us with their position as it relates to what you're alleging. We determine then what do we need to go to, whether or not it will be a Secretary Initiative complaint or individual complaints that relates to the issue.
Great, excellent.